If you've heard about ChatGPT but don't know how to use it, this video tutorial is for you. Today, I'm going to walk you through the basics of ChatGPT, how to get set up, and how to actually use it to get some great outputs. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do to get set up with ChatGPT is actually just Google it and search for the actual website. So I just typed in ChatGPT into Google here. If I click this, this is actually the OpenAI website that introduces ChatGPT and talks a little bit about what it exactly is and goes into some of the details behind how it works. If you want, you can definitely read through this. It's like an interesting read, and it just kind of tells you their framework and their thought of how they put this together. We're not going to do that here since this is more of a tutorial video. So what we're going to do is click this Try ChatGPT button. And a lot of times you're actually going to get this ChatGPT is at capacity right now message. And this is because a lot of people are trying to use the chatbot at a given time because it's so popular right now. And so if you get this, the two things to check are, one, make sure you're not in incognito mode, because I've noticed that it comes up a lot more in incognito mode. I'm in incognito mode right now just because I'm trying to show you guys what the login interface looks like. So if you're in incognito mode, just try to go to a non-incognito mode window. And then secondly, even if you're in a non-incognito mode window, it may come up from time to time. So you may have to check back in the future. You can click here to get an email to see when it's back. For me, it's been actually pretty good. If I just sit there and refresh for like a minute, it comes back. And so when it does come back, you're going to be taken to a login page that looks like this. If it's your first time, you're going to click sign up. If you've been here before, you're going to click login. I'm just going to show you guys what the sign up flow looks like. So if you do want to create an account, it's going to pull up this account page. You can create an account with your email address. You can continue with Google, or you can continue with the Microsoft account. So those are the three options that you have to actually log in and create an account on ChatGPT. And then that'll get you into the system, and you can continuously use that login for future instances of when you want to use ChatGPT. So for me, we're just going to click login here, and I actually connected with Google, so that's just my full stack ND email. And this is kind of what the experience looks like right off the bat. So you can see they're telling you that, oh, there's really high demand, so just hang tight. I just X that out because usually it works. And this is ChatGPT. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the entire interface, and I'm going to show you all the buttons, and then we're going to actually walk through what it means to create a prompt and actually talk to the bot itself. Okay, so when you log in for the first time, you're going to see this page, and this is kind of a sample chat that ChatGPT has already created for you, and it walks through a couple of things: examples, capabilities, and limitations. So examples, this kind of just tells you, what are types of things that you can actually ask the chatbot, and if you click any of these, it's going to go ahead and do that. So we're not going to do that right now, but for example, you can ask it, how do I make an HTTP request in JavaScript, and it'll give you some sample code that'll actually tell you how to make that request. The capabilities, this is kind of an interesting thing to think about. It does remember what you've said earlier in the conversation. I've noticed that sometimes it doesn't fully remember, but for example, if you had mentioned something previously in your chat and you say, oh, actually, can you update that to say this? Or, hey, can you tell me more about that thing that I said earlier? It's going to know what you talked about, so it's really like talking to a human. I mean, it's going to be able to pull that context into the next answer that it gives you. And so, yeah, you can provide follow-up corrections, and the one thing it declines inappropriate requests, so you'll come across this, I'm sure, at some point when you're just trying to mess around with the app, but things like that are political or, just like not very kind to others, it's not going to engage in those things. And a lot of times for me, I've actually been trying to ask it some medical related questions, and a lot of times it'll respond and say, hey, I'm not a doctor, so I can't, answer those questions. And the third thing to think about is limitations. And a lot of people have posted about where ChatGPT is wrong online. And I think that's kind of funny because, you shouldn't come into this bot thinking that it's going to know everything and it's going to be right about everything, because the way it works is it's essentially trained on the internet, or a large piece of the internet, and it knows the world and events of 2021. So it doesn't really know what happened after that. It doesn't know some things, but doesn't know everything. And then even on top of that, a lot of times it'll make things up. So it says here it's going to generate incorrect information. You'll see this in code snippets. I found this to be, incorrect sometimes, and you kind of have to know the underlying way a piece of code is supposed to work to actually, use it. Another thing is, a lot of times if you ask it for a research study, it'll generate a paper and it'll say, from the New England Journal of Medicine, this study in 2021. And then if you look that paper up, it doesn't actually exist. So just be careful of that. And the way I use ChatGPT is always validate whatever it says. Don't just take it to be true. So that's kind of the big overall picture. Let's quickly walk through the interface itself. So obviously this is the main screen here. Down here is where you can type things. and press enter, or you can click this button to actually chat with the AI. And then if you look on the left side here, this is actually where you can create new chats, and this is what a new chat window looks like. This is what we have right now, is a new chat. But the cool thing is if you want to have multiple chats, you can have a list of chats here, and you can kind of keep things siloed off into their own chats so that you can have a place for a specific type of chat. So for example, maybe you're talking about a coding tutorial or coding questions in one chat, and in the next chat you want to talk about something else, like maybe you want to talk about something research related or medicine related for me. And so those are kind of nice things to have. Or maybe in the third thing, you're creating a blog post and you're having it workshop some of the things that you're writing. So having multiple chats is really useful. And we'll talk about the other feature that I really like about creating these chats is that what it does is once you have a chat, it'll actually auto title that chat based on the content of what you're talking about. So for example, if I type in here, you know, how do I make an HTTP request in JavaScript? If I type that here, we're going to see that it's going to take a second because sometimes it's slow. So it's going to, and this is all real time just because I want to see, make sure you see the speed, and I'll probably speed it up later for other parts of the video. But for example, it's giving the chat here and it's giving all the output and whatever. It's going to give us some code. And then this is kind of nice because these code blocks, when they come in, not only do they give you the code, but there's a copy code button here. So you can actually just copy this and directly take it and paste it into, you know, VS Code or whatever you're using. And a lot of times what it's going to do is it's actually going to give you, when you ask it code, it's going to give you multiple things. So in this case, it's using, you know, this type of request or fetch, which is what I usually use. And then, you know, it'll go ahead and give you all of that code and you can copy that as well. But if you look back here at the actual chat, now it's gone ahead and renamed this as JavaScript HTTP requests. And that's really awesome because I didn't do this name. You know, it knew the context of what we were talking about and it named the chat accordingly. Obviously, you can rename something. So if I just wanted to change the name here and make it something called requests, I can do that just for my own personal benefit. And then the last thing is you can actually delete an entire chat entirely. So that's kind of the overall interface of the chat window and then of the list of chats. And then at the bottom left here, you can toggle dark mode because, you know, why wouldn't anybody want to do that? And then there's a Discord that you can join and that'll give you just, you know, access to the community. And then obviously updates and FAQ and then log out. So those are just a couple of settings options that you have. And that's the overall ChatGPT interface. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually use the application. Okay, so the main part of this application is obviously the chat window itself. This is where all the magic happens. And even more so than the chat window, it's this little input box right here. And so the thing that you type into this input box is called a prompt. And a prompt is basically just like, you know, a piece of information that you give to the AI bot, and it's going to go ahead and take that and then process it and actually respond to it. So for the sake of our example today, I'm going to talk to ChatGPT about writing a blog post that explains how to use Tailwind CSS and kind of the basics of Tailwind CSS, since that's something that I'm learning right now. So the first thing that I want to do is, you know, maybe I want to ask ChatGPT just to give me a basic example or a basic description of what Tailwind CSS is. So I would just type in that exact question right into the input, press enter, and then as you can see, there's two things here. There's my input here that shows my little profile picture, and this is exactly what I typed. And then there's ChatGPT's output from that prompt, which says, you know, Tailwind CSS is a utility for CSS framework, etc., etc. And it kind of takes whatever you put in and it gives you an output based on that. So now that's actually very simple, but there are a couple of other things. You know, maybe I wanted this to be a little bit longer, or maybe I wanted to be a little bit shorter. Maybe I just wanted to have a change in my prompt. So there's two ways I could handle that. I could go ahead and, you know, retype everything and say, what is Tailwind CSS explained in 5 sentences maybe. So that's one option. But the other option is if you hover over your initial prompt, you'll see a little edit button here. And if you click it, it's actually going to let you edit your original prompt. So for example, if I did want to change and I said, what is Tailwind CSS in 5 sentences, I can do that here. And I can actually press save and submit, and then ChatGPT will go ahead and regenerate that response, and it'll give me match the new input that I put in, match the new prompt that I put in. And as you can see in this case, it's taking in that input of 5 sentences and writing something a lot longer than what it had the first time. And so now the other thing is, you know, do we like this or do we not? This is just some feedback for OpenAI. So for example, you know, just to say, this is great. And that'll go back to the algorithm that they're using and the model that they're building, because essentially the reason for all of this is that they want people to use it just to make it better. And the other thing that used to be here, and I don't know why it's not showing right now, but sometimes, and maybe they're just experimenting, but sometimes there's a regenerate button down here. And so for example, if ChatGPT made this output and I read it and I didn't like it, I could actually press regenerate and it would try again to re-answer the same prompt. And then the other thing is, if you look back to my original prompt, now you can see when I hover over it, it says 2 out of 2. What does this mean? So if I click over, it shows me, this was the first prompt. And then if I click to the right, it says this was the second prompt, and you can actually see the outputs change as well. So those are kind of just examples of how the interface itself works, not only the input box, but also where you can type in and edit, and then also the output of what you can get, and then you can edit and also like and provide feedback to OpenAI. So the other thing that I wanted to point out just really quickly is, for example, you can see I'm regenerating something here. There is this button called stop generating that if I click, it'll just stop right where it is in its tracks. And that's just another thing that you can do is, if this is continuing to go on forever and you just want to be like, no, I want to actually type something else or have a different prompt, you can actually stop a prompt in the middle of it going so you don't have to wait for it to complete. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is actually how specific you should be with your prompts. ChatGPT does a lot better the more specific you are with whatever prompt or input you're giving it. So a lot of times people are going to come in and write something really, really generic, like something like write a blog post intro about Tailwind CSS. And that's fine. That's a good way to start maybe and actually get something out of ChatGPT. But a lot of times this is going to give you something that's generic. It's not really going to answer the question a lot of times, and it's going to be very high level, and it's not going to actually specify exactly what you're trying to do. So what I've kind of found is you want to be as specific as possible. And so what I mean by being as specific as possible is something like this. So my first post was write a blog post intro about Tailwind CSS. However, in this one, I'm saying, write something that's 4 sentences long, has a catchy hook, make it good for a beginner, and talk about the goal of Tailwind CSS and why you should use it. And, it's going to give a slightly different output. And maybe this isn't showing exactly that example of, why this might be better. And a lot of times that's kind of in writing, it's opinionated of what's better than what. But you'll see this, especially in code examples, when you're trying to create a code snippet, you want to be as specific as possible because ChatGPT is not going to know exactly how you're trying to structure your code. So a lot of times with code, what I'll actually do is I'll say, hey, I have this coding project and it's listed with these files and these directories. Can you generate this component? Or can you generate this specific file or this specific code block? And the more specific you are with a prompt, the better output you're going to get. I'm not going to go into all the different types of use cases in this video. I do have a different video talking about, good ways that I like to use ChatGPT, so you can definitely check that out. I'll link it here. But just something to remember is that you really do want to try to be as specific as you can in these prompts because that's what's going to give you the best output. Okay, so those are kind of the big things that you can do with ChatGPT. We've talked about the interface, we've talked about how to get set up, and we've talked about prompts, and we've also talked about different chats. What I want to do now in this video is, instead of going through a ton of examples, I do want to walk through at least like one example of where we're using ChatGPT and we're actually having a conversation with the bot to work on our blog post that's going to talk about how to use Tailwind CSS. Everything from idea generation and an outline to actually having paragraphs that we can potentially incorporate into our blog. So the very first thing that you'd want to do is, what does even a blog post look like? You want to write an outline for Tailwind CSS, and I want to make it suitable for beginners, and I want to have it talk about these specific things: how to use it, what it is, how to install it, and what are the use cases. So as you can see, once I tell it that I want an outline, it's going to give me something in outline format. And the good thing about this is it's really breaking down things into specific topics, and I don't have to go ahead and use all of these things. I can kind of pick and choose. But even from the very start, now that I'm using ChatGPT, I have a ton of ideas here that I can go ahead and include in a blog post. And maybe I'm not writing something so long and verbose, and so what I'll probably do is pick and choose some things and then use those and expand upon them using ChatGPT as well. So if I just do a quick read through of this, there's an introduction here with a brief overview and explanation of why it's useful, and then what it is, installation, benefits, and then use cases. And so this actually looks like a pretty good outline for me. So for example, if I wanted to start with the introduction, I could say, instead of actually even copying and pasting the introduction, I could just say, okay, this is great. ChatGPT now knows that it gave me this output, and then I could say something like, okay, thank you. Can you write an introduction paragraph for me based on the outline? And so here I've done this, and I'm saying, can you write an introduction paragraph for me based on the outline? So what it's doing in this case is it knows that there's an outline above here. It's given me an outline, and it also knows that there's a section for introduction. So what it's gonna do is actually gonna take this input, or take this entire input and process it, and understand that I want this introduction piece. And it's gonna be here, and it's actually gonna give me this specific output. And so this is actually pretty generic. That's fine. This looks good. Now, the point of this isn't for me just to take this and copy paste it into a blog post. Like, sure, you could do that. But the point of this is maybe this is going to give me a good starting point that I can then, either refactor, or I can edit, or I can incorporate into my own blog post. So the next part, we're going to skip over this what is Tailwind CSS because it's just going to be more text. But maybe we want some steps for installation. And so I can go back in here and I can say, thank you. Can you write some paragraphs for the installation based on the outline? Include code snippets. And that's actually great because right now what we're saying is, okay, we have this outline and we want it to actually go ahead and look at it and use this installation piece and actually write some output for that, and then include some code snippets. So what it's doing here is it's taking that outline and it's saying, okay, I know you're asking for number 3, options for installation, and here it is. This is how you can install. There's 3 common methods. You can use CDN, you can use all this, NPM, yarn, and then it's actually going to the B section of that part of the outline, and then it's saying this is what you have to do to actually use it. And so you can see directly that ChatGPT is remembering all of the things that it said earlier, and it's incorporating those things into the output that it's put here. So it's important to remember that, again, this isn't exactly what you're going to copy paste because it has all these like weird things from the outline, but it's taking the outline and actually using it as a framework along with code snippets to make your life a little bit easier, so that you can actually just take this and incorporate it into a blog post. And you can even see they gave an example of what they're doing here of how to use it, where you're adding a custom color to actually extend ChatGPT in the config file. The one thing that I am going to say is it's important to validate this code. A lot of times, it may not be right. And that's why I think a lot of people think that ChatGPT can just do everything for you. And that's not really the case. You actually have to be critical and make sure that it's doing exactly what you think it should be doing. And it's not about making everything automatic. It's about just making things a little bit faster and more productive. So I'm going to leave this example here, but basically you can go along and do the rest of this. And especially for the use cases section, maybe I pick out a couple of use cases and I can actually create code snippets for that and validate them and incorporate them in my blog. But as you can see, like even with, a few minutes of work here, we've got a pretty good blog post going of how we can use ChatGPT and in order to explain Tailwind to a beginner. And this is something that I could directly take into whatever editor that I use and incorporate that into a blog post that I want to send out. So I think this is a great use case of the platform. There are lots of other use cases, but this is one that's particularly stuck out to me, and it makes things just a little bit faster. So I'm going to end this video here. I hope that was valuable. I hope this gives you kind of an overview of how to use ChatGPT and how it works, how to get set up with the interface, and how to actually make prompts that'll give you something back in return that you can actually use. A lot of times people come here and they don't exactly know what to say, and you have to really come in with a strategy of what a prompt is. And don't be afraid to, refactor your prompts, and if something's not working, just try to change up the language. There are a couple of websites that I'll try to find and include in the description below that talk about specific prompts to use that people are using. And so if you need a repository where you need to get started or have a specific question or see cool things that people are doing with ChatGPT, you can do that here. That is a basic summary of how to get started with ChatGPT. There is so much more that you can do with this application to really push it to its limits, but the tools and resources that I've given you today are going to put you in a good position to get started. If you want to get a little bit more detailed look of the use cases that you can have with ChatGPT, I have a video right here that you should definitely check out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.